Ignorance isn't bliss. Ignorance is weakness. Ignorance is a sin. Now, yeah, just imagine that in Loid Forger's sexy ass voice instead of mine. Because these are the very words spoken and later embodied by the greatest spy in Westalis. It's a very philosophical and introspective quote to suit a man named Loid Forger. But how did such an elegant man come to this conclusion? Well, we are here to answer all your questions. Why Lloyd became the spy known as Twilight, his entire childhood story, and what are the secrets that Lloyd wouldn't want anyone to know, even the ones closest to him, like his sexy waifu Yor, and even the one he cares for the most, ANYA. Let's get started. Welcome back everyone, and it's time to go Ballsy! And today we're back with another video on Spy Family. This series is so awesome and the community is just as much. Your response on our last video was so elegant, or how the guy puts it, elegant. I can't remember.
Not elegant.
Shout out to our awesome community. I'm just gonna say, if we apply to that goddamn prestigious college, we will get in because all of you are so supportive. Shout out to you, her, him, this woman, this person, this guy, and you. All of you are elegant. In our last Spy Family video, we discussed the entire love story of Loid Forger and Yor, proving that these two are already in love and will eventually be married for real by the end of the manga, as they will confess their feelings to each other. A lot of you requested more Spy Family videos, but in return, can you smash the notification bell please? Do that for the channel and also like the video, because ANYA will be upset if you don't, and we all know what ANYA can do when she's upset.
Nice.
Now let's cue the serious music. Editor, if you may.
No.
Despite all the cute moments in Spy Family, there are also a lot of darker themes explored, primarily the realism portrayed by the protagonist of the series, Loid Forger, or Twilight when referred to his code name. The underlying theme revolves around wars between neighboring nations and their damage to common people's lives. And is there even a better way to showcase this other than putting the main character himself through the ringer? Twilight's identity of being a spy, now acting as a married man. Twilight's identity of being a spy, now acting as a married man and father, makes us question who this person really is. Is he really cold and heartless as depicted to be? Well, Spy Family answered all of these questions in the recent chapters, and we're here to explain them to you. Loid Forger, better known as Twilight, is the greatest spy known to mankind, working under the secret agency called WISE. Twilight has earned his name as a fearfully perfect spy from both his allies and enemies. Basically, he's built different, you know what I'm saying? I mean, this guy's got good looks, good voicing, you know, the women are fawning over this guy. But basically, Twilight has sworn loyalty to his country, Westalis, and will do anything to protect the people of his nation. He is calculative, strong, reliable, and smart as his role of a spy demands him to be. But most importantly, Twilight has discarded all hopes of an ordinary life, even his own identity, in order to fulfill his role as a peacekeeper from the shadows. There is not a job that Twilight can't do, even if it involves going into the very depths of dirty politics or putting on another disguise. His job as a Westalis spy is simple. He has to do whatever it takes to maintain peace between the West and the East. With the other side's constant attempts at going to war, Twilight and the entire WISE agency work on finding intel and forming counterplans accordingly. Whilst this job does sound simple, it is far more dangerous than one can even imagine. Twilight has to be constantly on his toes to guard against enemy attacks and not to draw attention to himself. For his missions, Twilight has dated and manipulated countless people in power and used every means possible, even their daughter's emotions, just like he did at the very start of the series. He dated the daughter of the foreign minister Karen. Yes, that's her name. I'm not saying she's a Karen, but that's her name, bro. And he retrieved photos of him wearing a hairpiece, which was supposedly enough to get him to resign. Twilight has executed several missions like infiltration to acquire data and completed a ton of covert operations helping his country maintain peace. The current story follows his latest mission, Operation Strix, where he has to stop Donovan Desmond from harming truce efforts between Ostania and Westalia. For this, he had 1 week to not only form a stable family with a wife and child, but he had to enroll his child to the most prestigious school in Ostania, Eden Academy. For this mission, Twilight took on the name Loid Forger. His last name Forger is a nod towards his real identity in the sense that he is a spy, and that Loid Forger doesn't actually exist. Get it right? Forging his name. Okay, we're on the same page still. Alright? Yeah. Cool. From what we've seen so far, Loid Forger is actually a sweetheart, man. Look at this man. Even I'm falling. Oh, okay. I'm not gay. Yo, cut this out. Cut this out. I'm moving a bit sus. Can we get a pause right now? I think I'm enjoying this anime a bit too much, covering videos on it, guys. You need to smash that like. You lot need to smash that like button, bro. Oh shit.
It's rewind time.
From what we've seen so far, Loid Forger is actually a sweetheart. Even though doing the bare minimum towards ANYA and Yor, as it would objectively be the right choice for his job, Loid is against it. Loid took several decisions that are similarly unnecessary and could end his mission. Yet he preferred to take these risks just because people around him were involved. For example, he stood up for Yor during the Eden interview in chapter 5 and even smashed the table in anger. He took the major risk of failing the interview because of his recklessness, but he couldn't stand ANYA being wronged. You can also see how happy he is to spend time with the Forger family throughout the manga, even though he doesn't admit it to himself. But his missions are always in line with his ideals. So let's talk about them, because that's what makes Loid the perfect man to simp for. You know, the perfect spy. As a spy, Loid always places his nation and mission above everything else, even his identity and desire to lead a normal life with his loved ones. He knows that the path he walks is a lonely one, and the people he protects will never know the efforts he puts in every day by laying his life on the line. Despite that, Loid continues his thankless job because he wants to create a world where civilians can live in peace and countries aren't at each other's throats. He sincerely believes his superior's words to him, that you will never earn any medals or make it into the papers. Even so, never forget that everyone else's day-to-day lives are possible because of your blood, sweat and tears. We even see him respect Yor because of the sacrifices she made to raise her younger brother, because he himself has also done countless actions to serve a higher purpose. Loid's past, which we are covering in this video, is a major reason why he believes in dedicating himself to create a world where children don't cry. Remember when ANYA cried in a recent episode? He went nuts. Well, it's all linked and comes full circle. The degree of importance in his missions is why Loid is extremely careful to the point of paranoia about trusting anybody except himself. Since Loid has lived most of his life all by himself, he can only trust himself to not make any mistakes whilst carrying out the most important missions that are stopping a war. He has honed himself to be equally smart and strong. For example, we can see how much Loid regrets being dependent on ANYA and Yor for the succession of Operation Strix in episode 4. He also couldn't handle the role of a father because he didn't know how to make sure a child doesn't make any mistakes. I am pretty sure if Loid had the choice, he would have cloned the younger and female versions of himself for Operation Strix if that technology existed. Like, that's how much he believes in himself rather than others, right? but we can even say that Lloyd trains himself like a superhuman, and he constantly criticizes himself if he accidentally makes a mistake, like we saw in episode 1 itself. Despite being a cold and heartless spy, Lloyd cares about innocent people the most. He would not harm them in any way to complete his tasks. This shows us that even if he puts up the persona of Twilight, he still has emotions underneath his harsh surface, like the budding love for his fake wife Yor, as we said in the last video. Throughout his mission, Lloyd has never failed to introspect over his actions, because even if he is just pretending, he has to be the perfect father and husband. He couldn't bring himself to force ANYA to study because he is more than just a spy Twilight. His actions tell us that Lloyd is very compassionate and empathetic because he himself never received it. But more importantly, we also see Lloyd's memories of his past coming up even though he thought he had buried them. In episode 1, we get a glimpse into Lloyd's past, telling us that things weren't as cheerful for him as they are now. When Lloyd was saving ANYA, he almost crudely expressed his frustration about kids because ANYA was crying her eyes out, just like any other kid would. But instead of finishing his sentence, he comes to a realization for the reason why he hates when kids cry. Our boy Twilight suddenly remembers his traumatic experience during the last war between Ostania and Westalis. His memories show him surrounded by ruins of a bombed city as he stood crying. ANYA's crying reminded Lloyd of himself when he cried but nobody came to help him. This scene made it apparent that there were situations that forced Lloyd to become the cold-hearted Twilight we know today. However, they weren't explained in detail until in chapter 62, where we finally get to see the kid Twilight. He was a cute, smart kid who grew up in a good neighborhood with his parents. He and his friends used to play a game similar to Catch, where one team would be the good guys and the others would be the bad guys. During this game, there's a nice callback to the time ANYA was kidnapped, as he says the same dialogue with the same intensity and expression. This essentially proves that Lloyd is a natural and that he is very passionate about saving his country as well. Obviously, the good guys were the country they belong to, but there is a real big secret behind this which we will explain in a moment. Anyways, Lloyd's friends would buy military game sets where they'd have a toy gun and could shoot people with them. However, Lloyd's parents never bought him the military set, so he would use a makeshift weapon. They weren't poor. Lloyd's father simply didn't want him and kids his age to engage in such games. This can be seen when his father reacts aggressively and even slaps Lloyd when he insists that he will join the army and fight in the war when he grows up, just like the rest of the boys. By now, it should be apparent that the country has been in a state of war for a while, and now the new generation is being injected with extreme patriotism to almost nurture them into living in a pro-war country. And Lloyd's father saw through this and how destructive this cycle can be, and that's why he doesn't want Lloyd and his friends to dream about fighting in a war. It is later revealed that Lloyd's father worked in the military at a high post as well, which explains his views knowing the truth. He has experienced the damages caused by war firsthand and wants to end it desperately, much like his government. I made a note of who the bad guys were when we started this discussion, and I'll expand on that now. As you can see, the kids are almost already brainwashed into fighting a war. These children are barely 5 years old. Even the whole military set toy is a disgusting way to capitalize on the sad and grave situation between two countries, as people are dying and suffering from irremovable trauma, especially the children. Whilst Lloyd never lied, he did so this time. To buy that military set in chapter 62, he told his father that he wants to buy a reference book, for which he was provided with the money instantly. Lloyd, being an honest child, felt repulsed and disgusted by his impulsive decision. His complete disgust towards his action was so strong that the panel stuck with me, guys, and I can remember the face he made clearly. Do you see that poor kid? He looks like he committed a war crime. He wanted to admit that he he lied, but knew that he most likely would have been slapped again, and then he chickened out. He later decided to earn money and pay his father back, thinking that it was more about how he spent his money. Here you can see just how honest and innocent Lloyd was as a child, and the Lloyd we know as Twilight can do it so effortlessly as if what he's saying is actually true. Sadly, this transition is extremely painful. Harrison, please explain why.
When Lloyd was inquiring to a lady at the bakery about a part-time job to pay off the money he owed his dad, a deafening, terrifying sound could be heard. The lady panicked and tried to evacuate with Lloyd. As a kid, Lloyd didn't really understand anything until now, and in the next moment the whole place had been blown over. He was standing in the middle of the road, still processing what the hell had just happened. It is also ironic how he survived because he was wearing that toy helmet, which was simply a way to capitalize on the war and make profits. He then overheard that the enemies had attacked them by breaking the peace treaty, resulting in an all-out war. Lloyd thankfully survived, and so did his mother. After being reunited, Lloyd spent quite a while simply hiding near furniture, and would also hug his mother and cry. I mean, that's pretty natural if you ask me. He's just simply a child at the end of the day, let's not forget. This, in a sense, made Lloyd want to give up on his dream to become a soldier, as he wouldn't feel like playing the war game anymore. However, this wasn't the end of the pain and suffering Lloyd and many more were gonna suffer. When Lloyd was fishing outside of his uncle's house, just a little ahead, another bombing raid started. This time too, he survived. Unfortunately though, the house and everything around it was not so lucky. Everything around him completely destroyed. Lloyd stood in the middle of the road, injured, crying his eyes out as he realised that his mum had been killed in the bombing. This is when he decided to take things into his own hands and made it his mission to stop this war. Earlier in chapter 1, we see the same scene being played, and Lloyd even says that no one reached their hand out to save me. Clearly, Lloyd was as desperate as ANYA in chapter 1, and even the cold-hearted spy Twilight wanted to save him. The trauma from his past stuck with him, even in his adult life, but his desire to tend towards world peace, it didn't come to him directly. He scurried around in poverty like a rat for years, carrying all of the emotional burden alone. As he says himself, everyone he loved was gone. All that remained were the things he despised. Hence, he picked up the gun to find a way to vent out his anger and frustration of losing everything. He even lied to the army officials to get into the army at least 2 years earlier than the minimum age by saying that he lost his birth certificate during the bombing, which, to be honest, is pretty plausible. Anyway, he created a fake name, probably for the first time, calling himself Roland Spoofy. Sorry. Serious. It's tragic. His last name was once again another wordplay of the whole thing being a spoof. This point is perhaps the true beginning of Twilight the Spy. Here, Lloyd is faced with multiple conflicts, even as a child, and people around him are used to beautifully express the type of perspectives the general public has during a war. Knowing that he wasn't the only one suffering this pain and the fact that it just won't stop until the war stops. It obviously isn't easy to do, and this was a very sad decision for a child to make. As Lloyd's father said, he should be dreaming of becoming someone who helps society or gaining knowledge, not picking up a gun. The bakery lady said the exact same thing too. She doesn't want to see him and all the other little kids grow up and use guns. She tells him that her relatives live in the east, and since they're close, you can see that there's no actual difference between the people of the east and the west. This obviously confuses the young Lloyd, as he doesn't really understand the motives of the people in power. The situation was getting tense already and his father left for the border. Unfortunately, Lloyd never got to meet his father again. Overwhelmed by the sadness and loneliness, Lloyd's heart was burning with the desire of revenge, and he very well fulfilled it. He shot up in the ranks of his country's arms and won a hell of a lot of battles. That is, until he came across an Ostanian deserter who got caught up in one of his traps in chapter 62.3. As an act of kindness and pity, Lloyd spared him and even engaged in conversation with him. However, this man presented some mind-boggling questions to Lloyd by telling him about research on how humans perceive violence and violence with reason. He wanted Lloyd to realise that people are naturally averse to violence, but if they're given a reason to commit violence, they won't be uncomfortable with said violent actions. The same applied to common soldiers like him, because the war that they were fighting was based on diplomatic disagreements that the soldiers had nothing to do with. In essence, the soldiers were staking their lives over an issue that they didn't even know about. But as the war went on, issues piled up, eventually turning people into mindless soldiers. The governments of both the countries were just teaching their people to hate each other. All the people in both countries believed that the other started the war, hence creating a reason to commit violence. This, of course, triggered Lloyd, who had lost everything because of Ostania, and he blamed the deserters' belief on propaganda. After all, the very reason behind Lloyd's choice to fight in the war was to avenge all that he had lost because of the bombing. However, Lloyd gets injured by another Ostanian soldier who was chasing after the deserter. He ends up away from the front lines and suddenly comes across the ghosts of his past. The 3 childhood friends that he thought he had lost were revealed to have survived. Being reunited with his friends brings Lloyd to tears, showing us that no matter how tough he had acted, he was still a child inside with a lot of pain in his heart. He'd been blaming himself for the death of his friends this entire time, but seeing them alive was a huge relief to him. He wanted nothing more than to go and have fun with them once again like they used to. But Lloyd's joy was short-lived. I mean, Lloyd's friends joined the front lines, but they all lost their lives in an ill-planned operation. Lloyd began thinking about how he could have prevented their deaths. Maybe if he had known the details of the operation, or maybe what the enemy was going to do. But he came to the conclusion that neither did he have that sort of power, nor did he know anything. Just like the Ostanian deserter had said, Lloyd didn't even know who started the war or why it was even started in the first place. For the first time in his life, he realised that he was powerless without one thing. That was the key to everything, and that was information. Lloyd's entire life been a lie. First, he had thought that there would be no war. Second, he had thought that all of his friends died in the bombing. And lastly, he had no freaking clue behind any of his actions, like hating the enemy or following his own country. He concluded that his worst enemy was ignorance. He thought to himself that ignorance isn't bliss. Ignorance is weakness. Ignorance is a sin. However, Lloyd was quick to accept this PTSD, and as he was doing so, he came across a strange man who, unlike Lloyd, seemed to know everything. The man also knew his real name, his real age, and even the man Lloyd had borrowed his name from. But this man also perfectly described Lloyd in a simple way by giving this analogy. This world is one giant onion, big and round with one false layer after another. And if you cut through those layers of lies, there are gonna be tears. The man was from the military itself, but belonged to the intelligence department and had come to recruit Lloyd because he believed that Lloyd has better talent in that department. He also thought that there was a weapon that was much more suited to Lloyd than any kind of firearm. He was talking about the strongest and most essential weapon being information, without which even the wars couldn't be started. This was essentially the same conclusion Lloyd had arrived at, and the death of his friends was actually a character-defining moment for him as a spy. The rest, as they say, is history. And as we saw earlier, Lloyd's entire profession is is now based on information, as an ironic way of him burying his old ignorant self and choosing the better path. Lloyd chose the alternative farthest away from unnecessary violence, a path that he could fully believe in and work towards the betterment of the world. It's safe to say that coming across the deserted Ostanian soldier altered Lloyd's way of thinking and gave him a perspective that he needed to step away from being a cold, mindless, ruthless soldier. But Lloyd's story also tells us how countless kids like him have forced themselves to enroll in the army because of the greed of diplomats who were fighting over materialistic things or simply clashing their ego. From being a way off understanding complex conflicts like joining the army at a young age to experiencing 2 devastating bombings, losing absolutely everything, scurrying around in poverty, to joining the army and killing tens of thousands of men. Twilight had been through it all. Lloyd presents to us a deeply motivated protagonist, one that has a goal that is near impossible to accomplish, even with his own extraordinary skills. He gave up everything, his own personality even, all for the sake of his country, and he doesn't even get acknowledgement for it. But still, realizing the motives behind his actions ensures that he never strays from his path and regards common people with emotions like compassion. We can even see that his so-called forgotten emotions are still in him because it's apparent that he loves his Forger family dearly, even though it's totally out of his plan. The effect of his decision on their lives is something he has to keep in mind, and this is quite possibly the first time he has become attached to someone in years. When he has to make a crucial decision between his duty and them, it's gonna be a painful moment for him. Lloyd is still that soft, kind-hearted kid, and leaving the people he loves and is loved back from would be near impossible for him, simply because deep inside his heart, this is all he ever wanted. Yet he has a higher obligation to respond to make sure that no other kid has to cry and suffer like he did, which is why he puts up the face of a cold-hearted spy even though he still longs for a normal human life. So Lloyd isn't really as cold as we think he is, and the manga definitely did a great job in showing us how much pain he has hidden behind him to become a spy master today. Now, if you liked the video, don't forget to smash that like button and let us know what you think about Lloyd's story in the comments. You'll also probably like this video because YouTube thinks you will, and so I implore you go check it out. Bye bye.